600 acres, water rights included. All of it yours, for one night, with me. Amelia Forsyth's voice cut through the hot Texas wind like a blade. Her gloved hand extended toward Jackson Hale as he stood frozen on his crumbling porch. His 7-year-old daughter Ellie clutched his leg, staring up at the elegant widow, whose black silk dress seemed to swallow the sunlight. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Lady, I don't know what kind of man you think I am." "The desperate kind," Amelia interrupted, her emerald eyes meeting his. "The kind who'll lose everything in 3 weeks when the bank comes calling." Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Comment below with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. Jackson's hands balled into fists at his sides. The leather deed folder Amelia held gleamed in the afternoon sun, pristine and foreign against the backdrop of his weathered ranch. "You've got 30 seconds to get off my property before I throw you off it myself," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Amelia didn't flinch. She'd expected resistance. She'd counted on it, actually. Men like Jackson Hale, proud, hard-working, ground down by circumstances beyond their control, they always resisted at first. It made what came next easier somehow, more honest. "Your daughter needs new shoes," Amelia said softly, glancing down at Ellie's worn boots, the leather splitting at the seams. "Your fence line is collapsing. You're 3 payments behind on your mortgage, and Marcus Thornton at First National has already drawn up the foreclosure papers. They're sitting on his desk right now, waiting for his signature." Jackson's face went pale. "How do you—" "Because I own the bank, Mr. Hale." Amelia's tone was matter-of-fact, businesslike. "I own most things in this county, and I'm offering you a way out." "Daddy?" Ellie's small voice broke the tension. "What does she mean?" Jackson placed his hand on his daughter's head, without taking his eyes off Amelia. "Go inside, sweetheart. Now." "But Daddy—" "Now, Ellie." The little girl's footsteps retreated into the house, and Jackson waited until he heard the door close before he spoke again. "You show up at my home, in front of my child, and proposition me like I'm some kind of—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The rage was choking him. "I'm propositioning you like you're a man with impossible choices," Amelia corrected. "And I'm offering you an impossible solution." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Expensive, foreign, everything his world wasn't. "One night, no obligations beyond that. In the morning, this deed transfers to your name. 600 acres of the richest grazing land in 3 counties. The creek that runs through it never runs dry. You'd have water for cattle, for crops, for whatever future you're trying to build for that little girl in there." Jackson's throat worked. "And what exactly do you expect in exchange for this generosity?" "Honesty." The word seemed to surprise even Amelia as it left her lips. She looked away, toward the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "One night where someone doesn't lie to me, doesn't want something from me beyond what I'm offering, doesn't pretend I'm anything other than what I am." "And what are you?" She met his eyes again, and for the first time he saw something beneath the careful composure. Something raw. "Alone," she said simply. The silence stretched between them like a wire-pulled taut, ready to snap. Jackson shook his head slowly. "I don't believe you. Rich widows don't drive 2 hours into the middle of nowhere to buy company from broke ranchers. What's the real reason you're here?" Amelia's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're smarter than most men I deal with, Mr. Hale. That's refreshing." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "My late husband, Charles Forsyth, built an empire in this state. He owned railroads, mines, thousands of acres of land. He was also a monster who destroyed everyone in his path. "I know who Charles Forsyth was," Jackson said coldly. "Every rancher in Texas knows that name." "Then you know he acquired most of his holdings through, let's call them creative business practices. Foreclosures bought at pennies on the dollar. Water rights seized through legal technicalities. Families displaced." Amelia's voice had gone flat, reciting facts like a judge reading a sentence. "3 years ago, he died. Left everything to me. And I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to live with what he did." "That's real touchin'," Jackson said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "But it doesn't explain why you're here. Because this land, the 600 acres I'm offering you, it used to belong to your grandfather." The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward. "What?" "Samuel Hale. He owned this ranch and the 600 acres that bordered it to the north. Prime land. My husband wanted it. Your grandfather wouldn't sell. So Charles found another way." Amelia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she opened the deed folder. "He discovered that Samuel had borrowed money from a bank in Fort Worth to buy equipment. The loan was legitimate, the payments were current. But Charles bought the bank, changed the terms of the loan retroactively, and when your grandfather couldn't meet the new payment schedule, Charles foreclosed. It took 3 months. By the end, Samuel Hale lost everything except this plot you're standing on now. He died 6 months later." Jackson's world tilted. His grandfather, the man who'd taught him to ride, to rope, to survive on this unforgiving land. The man who'd died when Jackson was 12, his spirit broken by some unnamed tragedy that the family never talked about. "You're lying. I have the paperwork, every document, every forged signature, every manipulated date. It's all in my safe in Dallas." Amelia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Your grandfather wasn't the only one. There were dozens, hundreds maybe. I've been trying to trace them all, but it's like untangling a web that spans the entire state." "So what? You think offering me a night in your bed somehow makes up for what your husband did? You think that's redemption?" Jackson's voice was rising, and he didn't care. "My grandfather died broken. My father grew up with nothing. And you want to waltz in here and I want to give you back what was stolen." Amelia's composure finally cracked.
"But I can't just hand it over. Don't you understand? If I start transferring property without explanation, my husband's business partners will challenge every transaction. They'll tie everything up in courts for years. But if there's a personal arrangement, something that looks like my own private business, something embarrassing enough that they won't want to examine it too closely, then it's just a rich widow buying herself a cowboy for the night," Jackson finished bitterly. "Nobody questions that." "Exactly." Jackson turned away from her, his hands gripping the porch railing so hard the wood creaked. Behind him, through the thin walls of the house, he could hear Ellie humming one of the songs her mother used to sing. Sarah had been gone 2 years now, taken by fever that they couldn't afford to treat properly. Sometimes Jackson still woke up, reaching for her. "I loved my wife," he said quietly. "I know. I'm not the kind of man who—" "I know that too." Amelia's voice was closer now. She'd moved to stand beside him, though she didn't touch him. "I'm not asking you to betray her memory. I'm asking you to save your daughter's future." "By selling myself?" "By accepting restitution for a crime committed against your family." Amelia set the deed folder on the railing between them. "Look at it, please." Jackson didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to tell this woman to take her guilt and her money and her twisted offer and leave. But his eyes betrayed him, dropping to the open folder. The deed was real. He could tell that much immediately. Legal language he only half understood, but the essential details were clear enough.
600 acres. Clear title. Water rights. The northern border of his current property extended all the way to Miller's Creek. His throat went dry. "Why me?" he asked hoarsely. "If you wanted to make amends, why not just—"
I don't know, give money to charity? Set up some kind of foundation?
Because that's what rich people do to feel better about themselves without actually changing anything. Amelia's words were sharp. "I don't want to feel better. I want to do something that costs me something, something real." "So you came looking for the most desperate man you could find." "I came looking for someone who deserved justice." She paused. "The fact that you're desperate is my husband's fault. He made you desperate. He made your father desperate. He made your grandfather desperate enough to—" She stopped abruptly. "Desperate enough to what?" Amelia closed her eyes. The night before the final foreclosure, Samuel Hale went to Charles and begged him to reconsider. He offered everything he had left: his horses, his equipment, his wife's jewelry. Charles refused, said business was business. She opened her eyes, and they were swimming with tears.
Your grandfather shot himself 2 weeks after they took the land. Did you know that?
Jackson's legs nearly gave out. The family had always said it was a heart attack, a sudden collapse out in the barn. But now, with Amelia's words hanging in the air, 1,000 small memories clicked into place. His father's bitterness, his grandmother's silence, the way no one ever wanted to talk about how Samuel died. "Get out," Jackson whispered. "Mr. Hale, get out!" The words tore from his chest. "Get off my land, now, before I do something I'll regret." Amelia nodded slowly. She closed the deed folder, but instead of taking it with her, she left it on the railing. "I'll be at the Dusty Rose Hotel in town for 3 days," she said quietly. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me. The offer stands." Jackson didn't watch her leave. He stood frozen at the railing, his vision blurring, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, he heard the carriage pull away, the horse's hooves fading into the distance. The door creaked open. Small footsteps crossed the porch. "Daddy, are you crying?" Jackson wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand and turned to face his daughter. She was looking up at him with Sarah's eyes, so much trust and love in that small face that it physically hurt. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just dusty out here." Ellie didn't look convinced, but she was 7 and had learned not to push when her father got quiet like this. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his waist, and Jackson held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. That night, after he put Ellie to bed, Jackson sat at the kitchen table with a deed folder in front of him. He didn't open it. Didn't need to. The offer was burned into his memory. 600 acres for 1 night. Justice for selling his soul. His grandfather's land returned in exchange for his dignity. The lamp flickered. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon. Jackson poured himself a drink from the bottle he kept for emergencies and special occasions. This qualified as both. "What would you do, Sarah?" he asked the empty room. But Sarah was gone, and the only answer was silence. Jackson thought about his daughter's worn shoes, thought about the fence he couldn't afford to repair, the cattle he'd had to sell at a loss last season, the doctor bills from Sarah's final illness that he was still paying off in tiny increments. Thought about the bank examiner who'd come by last week, making notes in a leather journal, his face carefully neutral. 3 weeks. That's what Amelia had said. 3 weeks until the foreclosure went through. He could swallow his pride for 1 night. He could endure the shame, the guilt, the weight of what he was doing. He could even rationalize it. This was his land, his family's land, and he was just taking back what had been stolen. But could he live with himself afterward? Jackson drank until the bottle was half empty, and the room was spinning. Then he stumbled to bed and dreamed of his grandfather, standing in a field of wildflowers that didn't exist anymore, asking him a question Jackson couldn't quite hear. He woke before dawn, head pounding, mouth dry as dust. The deed folder was still on the kitchen table where he'd left it. Jackson made coffee, fed the chickens, checked on the horses, did all the morning tasks that filled his days, moving through them like a ghost. Ellie got herself ready for school. She was good at that, too independent for a 7-year-old, but that was what poverty did to children. It forced them to grow up fast.
"Daddy, you look sick,"
she said at breakfast. "I'm fine, just tired."
"Is that lady coming back?"
Jackson's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. "Why do you ask?" Ellie shrugged, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate.
"She looks sad. Like you look sometimes, when you think I'm not watching."
Out of the mouths of babes. Jackson set his coffee down carefully. "I don't know if she's coming back, sweetheart."
"Are we going to lose the ranch?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut.
"Where did you hear that?"
"I heard you talking to Mr. Peterson at the feed store. He said the bank was... I don't remember the word, but it sounded bad."
Jackson closed his eyes. He'd thought she was outside playing. Should have been more careful. "We're going to be okay," he said, though the words felt like lies. "I promise." After Ellie left for school, Jackson saddled his horse and rode to town. Not to the Dusty Rose Hotel. Not yet. He had other business first. The First National Bank sat on Main Street, its brick facade gleaming in the morning sun. Jackson tied his horse to the rail and walked inside, his boots loud on the marble floor. Marcus Thornton's office was in the back. The banker looked up when Jackson knocked, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Hale, I wasn't expecting you. I want to see the foreclosure papers." Thornton's face went a shade paler. "Now, Jackson, there's no need to—" "Show me the papers, Marcus." The banker hesitated, then pulled a folder from his desk drawer. Jackson took it, flipped it open, and read quickly. There it was, in black and white. 3 weeks. Final payment due. Property to be seized and auctioned. "This is signed by Amelia Forsythe," Jackson said, pointing to the signature at the bottom. "Well, yes. Mrs. Forsythe owns the controlling interest in the bank. All major decisions require her approval." Jackson's jaw tightened. So she'd been telling the truth about that, at least. "And if I could make the payment? Full amount, plus fees?" Thornton looked uncomfortable. "Well, that would satisfy the debt, certainly. But Jackson, we both know you don't have that kind of money." "But if I did, hypothetically, then the foreclosure would be stopped, yes." Thornton paused. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Jackson handed the folder back without answering and walked out of the bank. His mind was racing, pieces clicking into place he didn't want to acknowledge. Amelia had set this up. Somehow she'd known exactly when the foreclosure was due, had timed her arrival perfectly. She probably even influenced the decision to accelerate the process, pushed Marcus to be less flexible than he might have been otherwise. She'd manufactured his desperation. The realization should have made him furious. Instead, Jackson found himself almost admiring her ruthlessness. This was what it looked like to move through the world with real power. You didn't wait for opportunities. You created them. He stood on Main Street, dust swirling around his boots, and made his decision. The Dusty Rose Hotel was the nicest building in town, which wasn't saying much. 2 stories, fresh paint, a lobby with actual carpet. The clerk at the desk recognized Jackson and tried not to show it. "I'm here to see Mrs. Forsythe," Jackson said. "Room 12, 2nd floor." Jackson climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a mile. Outside her door, he paused, his hand raised to knock. This was it, the moment where everything changed. He knocked. The door opened before his knuckles left the wood, and Amelia stood there in a simple day dress, her hair unpinned and falling around her shoulders in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable than she had at the ranch. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. "Don't." Jackson's voice was rough. "Don't act like you know me." "You're right. I apologize." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Will you come in?" Jackson hesitated on the threshold. Once he stepped inside, there'd be no taking it back. The whole town would know by morning that Jackson Hale had visited the Widow Forsythe's hotel room. Reputation was currency in a place like this, and his was about to be spent. He walked in. The room was larger than his entire house, with furniture that probably cost more than his annual income. Amelia closed the door, but didn't lock it, and somehow that small gesture steadied him. "You set me up," Jackson said without preamble. "The foreclosure. You made sure it happened exactly when you wanted it to." Amelia's face didn't change. "Yes." "Why not just buy the land from the bank and give it to me? Why all this theater?" "Because I tried that." She moved to a small table where a tea service sat cooling. 6 months ago, I identified 12 properties my husband had stolen through similar schemes. I bought them back through intermediaries and tried to return them to the original families. Do you know what happened? Jackson said nothing. 7 families refused outright, too proud to accept what they saw as charity. 3 took the land and sold it immediately for cash, then drank or gambled it away. 2 accepted but hired lawyers to sue me for additional damages, claiming emotional distress. Amelia poured tea with steady hands. The land ended up back on the market or tied up in courts. Nothing changed. Nothing was fixed. So you decided manipulation was better than honesty? I decided that redemption requires sacrifice, from both parties. She offered him a cup. He didn't take it. If I just hand you land, you'll always wonder what it cost. You'll always feel like you're in my debt. But if you earn it, if you pay a price that feels real to you, then I can live with myself? Jackson's laugh was bitter. You don't know anything about me, Mrs. Forsythe. I know your grandfather killed himself in his barn with your father's hunting rifle. I know your father drank himself to death trying to forget. I know your wife died because you couldn't afford the medicine that might have saved her. Amelia's voice remained calm, reciting facts like she was reading from a ledger. I know you work 18-hour days, and your daughter thinks scrambled eggs are a luxury. I know you haven't bought yourself new clothes in 4 years. Shall I continue? Jackson's hands trembled with rage. You had me investigated. I had you researched. There's a difference. Is there? He took a step toward her, and she didn't retreat. You show up with your money and your guilt and your investigations, thinking you can just, what, buy your way into heaven? Purchase forgiveness with land and lies? I don't believe in heaven, Mr. Hale, and I'm not buying forgiveness. Amelia set her teacup down with a precise click. I'm trying to dismantle an empire built on suffering, and whether you accept my offer or not, I'll keep doing it. You're just the first who might actually benefit instead of squandering what they're given. Jackson wanted to hit something, wanted to break the expensive furniture and shatter the china, and prove that her money couldn't control everything. Instead, he grabbed one of the delicate chairs and sat down hard enough that it creaked. Tell me the truth, he demanded. The real truth. What do you actually want from me? Amelia sat across from him, her posture perfect despite the informal setting. For a long moment, she just looked at him, and he forced himself to hold her gaze. I want to know what it feels like, she said finally. To be in a room with someone who doesn't see me as an opportunity, who doesn't want anything except what I'm offering, who won't pretend affection they don't feel. or loyalty they'll betray the moment it's convenient. You're describing a business transaction. Exactly. Honest. Clean. No deception about what it is. She paused. My husband had mistresses. Dozens of them, probably. They all pretended to love him. He pretended to believe them. It was a dance everyone knew the steps to. But you'll despise me. You'll take what I'm offering because you have no choice, and you won't pretend otherwise. That's the most honest thing anyone's offered me in years. Jackson stared at her. You're insane. Possibly. Does that change your answer? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to stand up and walk out and find some other way to save his ranch. Some path that didn't involve selling himself to a woman who'd had him investigated, like he was a piece of property she was considering purchasing. But there was no other way. He'd spent 2 years looking for one. If I agree to this, Jackson said slowly, I need conditions. Amelia's eyebrows rose slightly. Such as? Nobody knows. Not ever. This stays between us. Agreed. What else? The deed transfers before anything happens. I want it recorded at the land office, legal and binding, before I set foot in this room again. That defeats the purpose. If I transfer the land first, you could simply walk away. That's the point. You want honesty? Here it is. I don't trust you. Not even a little bit. So if you want me to believe this isn't some elaborate game, you prove it. Give me the land first. Amelia considered this, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her chair. You're a harder negotiator than most businessmen I deal with. I learn from men who are cheated by your husband. Touché. She stood, crossed to a desk, and withdrew a sheaf of papers. I had these drawn up already. The deed transfer, contingent on certain conditions being met. But I can have my lawyer strike those provisions and file it unconditionally. It will take 2 days. I can wait 2 days. Can you? Amelia's eyes were sharp. The bank examiner is scheduled to deliver his final recommendation to the board tomorrow morning. Once that happens, the foreclosure becomes automatic. No amount of payment will stop it. Jackson felt ice crystallize in his chest. You didn't mention that before. Because I assumed you'd take the offer as presented. I didn't anticipate you'd try to renegotiate the terms. She returned to her seat, the papers still in her hand. So here we are. You can accept the original arrangement, tonight, with the deed transferring tomorrow morning before the board meeting. Or you can insist on your conditions and lose everything while my lawyers file paperwork that won't matter anymore. That's not a choice. That's extortion. Yes, Amelia agreed calmly. It is. Welcome to how my husband did business. Does it feel fair? Does it feel just? Does it feel like you have any real power in this situation? Jackson's vision blurred red. He was on his feet before he realized it, the chair clattering backward. You manipulative. Careful, Mr. Hale. Amelia's voice was soft, but carried an edge like steel. You can be angry. You have every right. But if you want to save your daughter's future, you'll swallow that anger and make a decision based on facts, not feelings. Facts? Here's a fact. You're exactly like your husband. You just dress it up prettier. The words hit their mark. Amelia's composure cracked for just a second, pain flashing across her face before she locked it down again. Perhaps you're right, she said quietly. Perhaps I am. But unlike Charles, I'm trying to give back instead of take. That has to count for something. Does it? Jackson was breathing hard, his whole body tense. You're still manipulating people, still using money as a weapon. The only difference is you feel guilty about it. And you think guilt doesn't matter? You think remorse is meaningless? Amelia stood to face him, and he realized they were close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. My husband died proud of what he'd built. He never once questioned whether he'd earned his fortune honestly. I question it every single day. If that doesn't matter, then nothing does. Guilt without change is just self-pity. Then help me change. The words burst from her with unexpected force. Take the land. Use it. Build something good on soil that was stolen. Prove that something worthwhile can come from this mess. Because if you don't, if you walk away and let the bank take it, then my husband wins. Even dead, he wins. And that little girl of yours loses everything because you were too proud to accept help when it was offered. Jackson's throat closed up. She'd gone straight for the jugular, and they both knew it. That's low, he managed. I know, but it's also true. Amelia's voice gentled slightly. I'm not asking you to like me, Jackson. I'm not even asking you to forgive me for the methods I'm using. I'm asking you to be practical, to do what your grandfather couldn't do. Bend instead of breaking. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. One night, Jackson said finally, and then you leave. You never contact me again, never come back to this town, never acknowledge what happened here. Agreed. And I want something else in the contract. A trust fund for Ellie. Enough for school, for medical care, for... He stopped, unable to continue. For everything you couldn't give your wife, Amelia finished softly. Yes, I can do that. Jackson closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something fundamental had shifted. He'd crossed a line, and they both knew it. How do we do this? He asked, and hated how small his voice sounded. Amelia walked to the desk and withdrew a document. This is the transfer agreement. Read it. If you agree to the terms, sign here. She pointed to a blank line. I'll have my lawyer file it with the land office first thing tomorrow morning. The trust fund for Ellie will be established within the week. Jackson took the document with numb fingers. The legal language swam before his eyes, but the essential facts were clear. 600 acres, water rights, clear title, and a separate provision for a trust in Ellie's name, funded with enough money that she'd never know the poverty that had defined her first 7 years. All of it bought with one night of his life. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. Wait, Amelia said. Before you sign, I need you to understand something. Once this is done, you'll hate me. Probably hate yourself, too. I won't hold that against you. In fact, I'm counting on it. Because that hatred, that disgust, that's what makes this real. That's what makes it cost something. You really are insane, Jackson whispered. Probably, but I'm also your only option. She paused. Sign or don't. The choice is yours. It always has been. Jackson looked at the document, looked at the woman who'd orchestrated this whole impossible situation, looked at the future she was offering and the price she was asking. Then he signed his name. The pen scratched across the paper with a sound like a death sentence. Amelia took the document, reviewed his signature, and countersigned it herself. It's done. Not yet, it's not. Jackson's voice was hollow. No, not yet. She folded the document carefully and placed it back in the desk. But the legal portion is complete. The rest is... different. Jackson wanted to ask what she meant, but the words wouldn't come. He stood frozen in the middle of the expensive hotel room, watching as Amelia moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of whiskey. You look like you could use this, she said, pouring 2 glasses. I don't want your whiskey. Drink it anyway. We have 12 hours until sunrise. We should at least try to be civil. Jackson took the glass because he didn't know what else to do. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied him slightly. Tell me about your wife, Amelia said, settling into a chair. No. Then tell me about your daughter. Why? Because I'd like to know what kind of man I'm dealing with, beyond the financial records and investigation reports. She sipped her whiskey. Please. Jackson wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the wall between them, keep this transaction as cold and impersonal as possible. But something in Amelia's tone, genuine curiosity, not the calculated interest of someone gathering information, made him pause. Ellie's smart, he heard himself say. Smarter than me. She taught herself to read before she started school. Loves horses. Wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. That's expensive training. I know. The trust fund will... He stopped. You planned that too, didn't you? Made sure there'd be enough for her dreams. I researched what veterinary school costs, yes. Jackson drained his glass. I should hate you more than I do. The night's young. Amelia refilled both their glasses. Tell me something else. Something I wouldn't find in a report. Why? Because I'm curious. Because we have time to kill. Because I'd rather spend it talking than sitting in awkward silence. She paused. Humor me. Jackson stared into his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. Ellie still sleeps with her mother's shawl. Won't wash it because she says it still smells like Sarah. I don't have the heart to tell her that scent faded a year ago. Amelia was quiet for a moment. That's heartbreaking. That's life on the frontier. People die. Children grieve. The world keeps turning. You're angry at me for what I'm doing, but you're angrier at yourself for agreeing to it. It wasn't a question, but Jackson answered anyway. Yes. Good. Hold on to that anger. It'll make the morning easier. Amelia stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. Do you want to know a secret, Jackson? Not particularly. I'm terrified. She didn't turn around. Absolutely terrified. Because once tomorrow comes, once the deed is filed and the money transferred, I'll have actually done something that can't be undone. I'll have actually made a difference instead of just sitting in my mansion feeling guilty. And I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. Jackson set his glass down. You're strong enough to manipulate me into this room, strong enough to engineer an entire foreclosure to get what you want. Don't pretend to be weak now. Strength and fear aren't opposites. She finally turned to face him. I can be both. So can you. Is this the part where we bond over our shared trauma? Jackson's tone was mocking. Where I admit that maybe you're not so bad after all? No. This is the part where we acknowledge that we're both trapped in a situation neither of us would have chosen. Doing things we'll regret, for reasons that seemed better in theory than they feel in practice. Amelia's smile was sad. I don't need you to like me, Jackson, but I'd appreciate it if we could at least be honest with each other for the next 12 hours. Jackson thought about his daughter sleeping in her bed at home, unaware that her father was in a hotel room, making deals he'd never be able to explain. Thought about his grandfather, dead in a barn with a rifle. Thought about Sarah, burning up with fever while he held her hand and pretended he wasn't watching her die. Honesty, he said flatly. Fine, here's honest. I despise you. I despise what you're doing, how you're doing it, and the fact that you're right. I despise that I'm here. I despise myself for signing that paper. And I despise that some part of me is grateful, because at least Ellie will have a chance now. At least something good comes from this mess. That's honest enough for you? Yes. Amelia's voice was barely above a whisper. Thank you. They stood there in the lamplight, two people bound together by guilt and desperation and 600 acres of stolen land. And Jackson wondered if this was what damnation felt like. Not fire and brimstone, but a quiet hotel room and choices that had no good answers. Tell me about your husband, he said suddenly. Amelia's eyebrows rose. Why? Because you asked about my family. Seems fair. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Charles was charming. When I met him, I was 19 and he was 45. My father owed him money. Charles offered to forgive the debt if I'd marry him. She laughed without humor. So I suppose I've been on both sides of this type of arrangement. Jackson hadn't expected that. Did you love him? I thought I did. For the first year, maybe. He was attentive, generous with gifts. Then I realized the gifts were replacements for actual affection. The attention was just him showing off his latest acquisition. She refilled her glass again. By the time I understood what our marriage really was, I was too tangled up in his business empire to leave. And then he died, and I inherited everything, and I realized I had no idea who I was without him defining me. So you decided to give it all away? Not all of it, just the pieces that were stolen. Amelia met his eyes. I'm not a saint, Jackson. I'm keeping enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But I'm trying to strip away the parts of his legacy that were built on other people's suffering. That feels like something. It is something, Jackson admitted grudgingly, even if your methods are questionable. My methods are terrible, Amelia corrected, but they're effective. And right now, effectiveness matters more than propriety. Jackson couldn't argue with that. He drained his second glass and felt the whiskey warming his blood, loosening the knot of tension in his chest. What happens after tomorrow? He asked. I told you. I leave. You never see me again. And the land? You don't want updates? Progress reports? No. It's yours. What you do with it is none of my business. She paused. Though I hope you'll use it well. For Ellie's sake, if nothing else. I'll use it well, Jackson said quietly. I promise you that much. Amelia smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful mask she wore like armor. Then maybe this mess will have been worth it after all. The hours stretched on. They talked about everything and nothing. Frontier life and Dallas society. Raising daughters and running businesses. Dreams that died and hopes that somehow survived. The whiskey bottle emptied slowly, and somewhere around midnight, Jackson realized he'd stopped hating her quite so intensely. Which was dangerous, because hatred was simpler than this. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Amelia said around 2 a.m, her words slightly slurred from the whiskey. Jackson looked at her across the dimly lit room. Her perfect posture had softened, her guard lowering inch by inch with each passing hour. Why would I do that? Because we're both going to regret this night for the rest of our lives. Might as well make it memorable. She leaned forward. Come on, Cowboy. One secret. I'll trade you one of mine. I don't want your secrets. Liar. Amelia's smile was knowing. Everyone wants secrets. They're currency. Power. Insurance. Jackson's jaw tightened. That how you see everything? As a transaction? That's how everything is, whether we admit it or not. She poured the last of the whiskey into their glasses. So what's it going to be? Your deepest shame for mine? He should have said no, should have kept the walls up, maintained the distance. But the whiskey and the late hour and the sheer strangeness of the situation loosened something in his chest. I was relieved when Sarah died, he said quietly. Amelia went very still. Not because I didn't love her. God, I loved her so much it hurt. But watching her suffer, watching her waste away while I couldn't do anything to help. Jackson's voice cracked. When she finally stopped breathing, my first thought wasn't grief. It was relief. That she wasn't hurting anymore. That I didn't have to watch her die another day. And I've hated myself for that ever since. The silence was absolute. Then Amelia spoke, her voice barely audible. I pushed my husband down the stairs. Jackson's head snapped up.
What?
3 years ago, the night he died. Everyone thinks it was an accident. Heart attack, fall, tragic end to a powerful man. Amelia's hands were shaking. But I was there. We were arguing at the top of the stairs. He'd just told me about another family he'd destroyed, laughing about it like it was a joke. And I put my hands on his chest, and I pushed. Jesus Christ! Jackson set his glass down hard. You murdered him. Did I? He grabbed for the railing, lost his balance. Maybe he would have fallen anyway. Maybe the heart attack would have killed him before he hit the bottom. The doctors couldn't say for certain. She met Jackson's eyes. But I pushed him, and I've never told another living soul. Jackson stood up so fast his chair tipped over. You're confessing to murder. To me. Why? Because you just confessed to being human. Seemed fair. Amelia's laugh was brittle. Besides, who would you tell? Who'd believe the widow Forsyth murdered her husband? I'm a grieving woman trying to make amends for his sins. That's the story everyone knows. You're insane. I knew it before, but now... Jackson paced the room. Do you understand what you just told me? I understand that we're both carrying guilt that's eating us alive. Yours just happens to be less actionable in a court of law. She stood as well, swaying slightly. You wanted honesty, Jackson. There it is. The woman trying to give you 600 acres killed her husband. Does that change anything? It changes everything. Does it? You're still signing papers tomorrow, still taking the land, still choosing your daughter's future over your principles. Amelia's voice turned sharp. The only difference is now you know the money comes from blood instead of just greed. Does that make it dirtier or cleaner? I genuinely don't know. Jackson grabbed her shoulders. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm drunk. Because it's 3 a.m. Because you're the first person in 3 years who's looked at me like I'm a human being instead of a bank account. She didn't pull away from his grip. Because maybe I wanted someone to know the truth before I spend the rest of my life pretending. You could hang for this. Only if someone reports it. Are you going to report it, Jackson? He should. He knew he should. But his hands were still on her shoulders, and she was looking up at him with eyes that held too much pain to be an act. And he realized with sick clarity that he wasn't going to say a word. I hate you, he whispered. I know. Amelia's hands came up to rest on his chest. I hate me too. Jackson didn't know who moved first. It might have been him. It might have been her. But suddenly they were kissing, with a desperation that had nothing to do with desire, and everything to do with two people drowning in guilt, trying to find something solid to hold on to. He pulled back abruptly, breathing hard. No, this isn't... We can't... We already did the moment you signed those papers. Amelia's voice was rough. This is just the honest version, instead of the transaction you agreed to. There's nothing honest about this. Isn't there? You want me. I want you. Not because we like each other. Not because this means anything. But because we're both so goddamn lonely we can barely stand it. Her fingers curled into his shirt. One night, Jackson. That's all we have. After tomorrow, you go back to your ranch and I go back to Dallas, and we never speak of this again. So we can spend it pretending, or we can spend it being real. Your choice. Jackson's mind was screaming at him to walk away, to leave right now, forfeit the land, find some other way to save his ranch. But his body wasn't listening. His hands were pulling her closer, his mouth finding hers again, and this time he didn't pull back. The rest of the night blurred into moments he'd spend years trying to forget. Her hands on his skin, his lips on her throat, both of them desperate and angry and seeking something neither could name. When it was over, they lay in the dark not touching, the silence heavier than any words. "I'm sorry," Amelia finally said. "For what?" "For all of it. The manipulation, the confession, this." She turned her head to look at him. "You deserved better." "So did you." Jackson stared at the ceiling. "Your husband was a monster. Being married to a monster doesn't justify becoming one. You're not a monster, you're just broken. We're both broken." She reached out, her fingers finding his in the darkness. Maybe that's why this worked. Two broken people making terrible decisions and calling it redemption. Jackson squeezed her hand once, then let go. "What time is it?" "Almost 5. Sun'll be up soon." "Then I should go, before—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Before it gets more complicated than it already is," Amelia completed. "Yes, you should." But neither of them moved. They lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, and Jackson realized this was the moment that would haunt him more than anything else. Not the sex, not the signed papers, but this quiet aftermath where they were just two people who understood each other's pain too well. "The lawyer will have the deed filed by 9, Amelia said eventually. "The trust fund paperwork will take a few days, but I'll wire the initial deposit to the bank this afternoon. You'll have access to it by the end of the week." "Very efficient." "I run a business empire. Efficiency is what I do." She paused. "Will you tell Ellie where the money came from?" "God, no. I'll tell her we found an investor, someone who believed in the ranch." Jackson's throat tightened. "She's 7. She doesn't need to know her father sold himself for her future." "You didn't sell yourself. You made a choice under impossible circumstances." "That what you tell yourself about pushing your husband?" The words were cruel, and he knew it. But Amelia just laughed softly. "Every single day. Doesn't make it true, but it helps me sleep at night." She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "You should go, before someone sees you leaving." Jackson dressed quickly, his movements mechanical. When he was fully clothed, he turned to find Amelia watching him from the bed, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being honest. For making this real instead of just a transaction. For not pretending to feel something you don't." She pulled her knees to her chest. "And for not reporting what I told you. I'll understand if you change your mind later, but thank you for tonight." Jackson wanted to say something meaningful, something that would make sense of what had just happened. But there were no words for this. "Goodbye, Amelia." "Goodbye, Jackson." He left without looking back, slipping out of the hotel just as the first pink light touched the horizon. The walk home took an hour, and with every step he tried to convince himself that he'd done the right thing, that saving Ellie's future justified the cost. He was still trying when he reached his ranch. Ellie was awake, sitting on the porch in her nightgown. She jumped up when she saw him. "Daddy, where were you? I woke up and you were gone, and I got scared." Jackson's heart shattered. He'd been so focused on the deal, on the land, on his own moral struggle, that he'd forgotten his daughter might wake up and find him missing. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I had business in town. Should have left a note." "What kind of business happens in the middle of the night?" "Complicated business." He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her hair. "But it's done now, and things are going to get better. I promise." "Is it about that lady? The one who came here?" Jackson's blood ran cold. "Why do you ask that?" "Because she looked at you the way Mama used to look at you, before she got sick." Ellie pulled back to study his face. "She likes you." "It's not like that, Ellie." "Then what's it like?" How did you explain moral compromise to a 7-year-old? How did you tell your daughter that sometimes adults made choices that felt wrong, but were necessary? "It's complicated," he repeated. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Ellie nodded slowly, but her eyes were uncertain. Jackson hated that look. Hated that he'd put it there. "Let's make breakfast," he said, steering her toward the house. "And then you need to get ready for school." The morning passed in a haze. Jackson went through the motions, cooking eggs, packing Ellie's lunch, walking her to the road where she'd meet the other children. But his mind was back in that hotel room, replaying every moment, every word, every terrible decision. At 8:30, a boy on horseback arrived with a message. The deed had been filed. The land was legally his. 600 acres of fertile grazing land with permanent water rights, transferred from the estate of Charles Forsyth to Jackson Hale, recorded in the county register. Jackson held the official notice with shaking hands. It was real. He owned land his grandfather had died trying to keep. He'd secured Ellie's future. He'd won. So why did it feel like losing? The knock on his door came at 10. Jackson opened it to find Marcus Thornton standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Jackson. Mind if I come in?" "Depends. You here to foreclose on me?" "Actually, no." Marcus stepped inside, hat in hand. "Just got word from Mrs. Forsyth's lawyers. Your account has been credited with enough to cover your outstanding mortgage balance, plus 6 months of payments in advance. The foreclosure's been canceled." Jackson's vision swam. "She didn't have to do that. That wasn't part of the deal." "What deal?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Jackson, what exactly is going on between you and Mrs.
Forsyth?
"Nothing. Business arrangement. She's investing in the ranch."
Must be some investment. Between the land transfer and the mortgage payment, she's put about $30,000 into your operation.
Marcus's tone was carefully neutral. "That's a lot of money for a woman who doesn't know you."
She knew my grandfather.
"Did she now?" Marcus didn't sound convinced. "Well, whatever the arrangement, congratulations. You've gone from broke to solvent in less than 12 hours. That's got to be some kind of record."
"Yeah, lucky me."
Jackson's voice was hollow. Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You all right? You look like you haven't slept."
"I'm fine, just processing."
"Right. Well, I'll let you get back to it." Marcus headed for the door, then paused. "Jackson, whatever happened, whatever you had to do to get this money, it's done now. Don't torture yourself over it. Just use it well and move on." After Marcus left, Jackson sat at his kitchen table and stared at the official notice. $30,000. 600 acres. A trust fund for Ellie. A future he'd never dreamed possible, all bought with one night and a woman's confession of murder. The irony wasn't lost on him. Amelia had given him land stolen by her husband, paid for with money earned through that same theft, laundered through a transaction designed to look like something it wasn't. Blood money, twice over. And he'd taken it. Jackson laughed, and it came out sounding broken. A second knock interrupted his spiral. This time it was a telegram boy. "Message for Mr. Hale." Jackson tipped the boy and opened the telegram with numb fingers. "Stop. Wire transfer complete. Stop. Trust established. Stop. Leaving for Dallas, noon train. Stop. Thank you for everything. Stop. Forgive yourself. Stop. A.F." Jackson read it 3 times, then threw it in the stove and watched it burn. Forgive yourself, as if it were that simple. As if a night of brutal honesty and desperate coupling could erase the fact that he'd compromised everything he thought he believed in. As if Amelia's money could wash away the stain of how it was earned. But the land was real. The money was real. And Ellie's future was real. That had to be enough. It had to be. Jackson stood, walked outside, and looked north toward the 600 acres that now belonged to him. his grandfather's land. Stolen, returned, purchased with the most complicated currency he'd ever dealt in. "I hope you're watching, old man," he said to the empty sky. "I hope you understand why I did it. Because I'm not sure I do." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of spring grass and possibility. Jackson closed his eyes and tried to imagine a future where this decision didn't haunt him, where he could look his daughter in the eye and know he'd made the right choice. He was still trying when Ellie came home from school that afternoon, chattering about her day, oblivious to the fact that everything had changed.
"Daddy, can we go see the new land? The land that lady gave us?"
Jackson's chest tightened. "She didn't give it to us, sweetheart. It's a business investment."
"Can we still see it?"
He wanted to say no, wanted to avoid that land for as long as possible. Let the guilt settle before confronting the physical reality of what he'd done. But Ellie was looking up at him with Sarah's eyes, full of hope and excitement. "Yeah," he heard himself say. "Yeah, we can go see it." They saddled horses and rode north. The boundary line was marked by an old fence that Jackson's grandfather had built 50 years ago. On the other side stretched 600 acres of rolling grassland, rich soil, and a creek that sparkled in the afternoon sun.
"It's beautiful,"
Ellie breathed.
"Mama would have loved it."
"Yeah, she would have." Jackson's voice cracked.
"Are you crying again, Daddy?"
"Just dusty." He wiped his eyes. "Come on, let's ride the fence line, see what we're working with." They spent 2 hours exploring the land, and with each passing minute, Jackson felt the weight of what he'd done settling into his bones. This wasn't just property. This was legacy, history, a second chance his grandfather never got. And he'd bought it by betraying everything the old man had stood for.
"Daddy, you're quiet."
Jackson looked down at his daughter, sitting proud in her saddle, her face lit up with dreams of the future. A future he'd secured, no matter the cost. "Just thinking, sweetheart. Just thinking about what comes next." What came next arrived 3 days later in the form of a black carriage bearing the seal of Forsyth Industries. Jackson was mending fence when he saw it approach, dust rising behind the wheels like a threat. His stomach dropped. Amelia had promised to leave, to never return. This couldn't be her. It wasn't. The man who stepped down was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jackson's entire herd. He walked with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "Mr. Jackson Hale?" His voice was smooth as oiled leather. "Depends who's asking." "Theodore Blackwood. I'm the senior partner at Forsyth Industries. We need to talk about your recent land acquisition." Jackson's hands tightened on the fence post. "It's a legal transfer, all recorded proper at the county office." "Oh, I'm aware it's legal. That's precisely the problem." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You see, Mrs. Forsyth has been making a number of unusual business decisions lately, transferring valuable properties to strangers, large cash transactions with no clear business purpose. Her partners are concerned." "That's between you and her." "Actually, it's between me and you." Blackwood pulled out a leather folder. This land was part of the Forsyth corporate holdings. Mrs. Forsyth had no legal authority to transfer it without board approval, which means this deed might not be worth the paper it's printed on. The world tilted. Jackson grabbed the fence rail to steady himself. "You're lying. I wish I were. But corporate law is clear. Assets held by the company require majority shareholder approval for transfer. Mrs. Forsyth owns 51%, but she needed board authorization for this transaction. She didn't get it." Blackwood opened the folder. "Which means I can challenge this transfer in court, and likely win." "Why are you telling me this? Why not just file your lawsuit?" "Because lawsuits are expensive and messy. I prefer to handle this quietly. Blackwood's eyes glittered. "Tell me, Mr. Hale, what exactly did you give Mrs. Forsythe in exchange for 600 acres of prime land?" Jackson's blood ran cold. "That's none of your business." "But it is. You see, if this was a legitimate business transaction, there should be documentation, contracts, payment records. Something that explains why a wealthy widow would transfer $30,000 worth of property to a broke rancher she'd never met." Blackwood stepped closer. "Unless, of course, there's another explanation. One that would be quite scandalous if it became public." "You're threatening me." "I'm offering you a choice. Tell me the truth about your arrangement with Mrs. Forsythe, and I'll make sure the board overlooks the irregularities in the transfer. Refuse, and I'll drag this through every court in Texas. By the time we're done, you'll have spent every penny of that trust fund on legal fees, and you still won't own an inch of this land." Jackson's mind raced. If he told the truth, Amelia's reputation would be destroyed. If he lied, he'd lose everything. And if he said nothing... "Daddy?" Both men turned. Ellie stood on the porch, her schoolbooks clutched to her chest. "Go inside, sweetheart," Jackson said, his voice strained. "But who is—" "Inside. Now." Ellie's face crumpled, but she obeyed. Jackson waited until the door closed before turning back to Blackwood. "You've got some nerve coming to my home, threatening me in front of my daughter." "I have nerve? You're the one who compromised a widow for financial gain." Blackwood's voice dripped contempt. "Don't pretend to be righteous, Mr. Hale. We both know what you are." Jackson's fist connected with Blackwood's jaw before he could stop himself. The older man staggered backward, blood trickling from his split lip. "Get off my property," Jackson growled, "and tell your board that if they want this land, they can take it over my dead body." Blackwood dabbed at his lip with a handkerchief, his eyes cold. "That can be arranged." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. You've made powerful enemies, Mr. Hale, and we don't lose." Blackwood climbed back into his carriage. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, I file paperwork that will destroy both you and Mrs. Forsythe. Think about your daughter before you make your final decision." The carriage rolled away, leaving Jackson standing in the dust, his knuckles bleeding, his world crumbling. He'd been so focused on the immediate transaction that he hadn't considered the larger implications. Of course Amelia's business partners would investigate. Of course they'd challenge transfers that didn't make sense. He'd been a fool to think this could stay quiet. Jackson walked to the house on unsteady legs. Inside, Ellie was crying at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to make you mad." "You didn't, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you." He knelt beside her chair. "That man was he was trying to cause trouble. It's not your fault." What kind of trouble? How much truth could a 7-year-old handle? How much should she know about the mess her father had created? "The kind that might mean we lose the new land," Jackson said carefully. Ellie's eyes went wide. "But it's ours. You said it was ours." "I thought it was, but there are some complications." "Is it because of that lady? The sad one?" Jackson's heart stopped. "What makes you say that?" "Because that man mentioned her, and you got upset when he did." Ellie wiped her eyes. "Did she do something bad?" "No, she tried to do something good. But sometimes good things get complicated." "I don't understand." "Neither do I, sweetheart. Neither do I." That night, after Ellie was asleep, Jackson sat at his table and tried to figure out his next move. He could contact Amelia, warn her about Blackwood's threat. But she'd left for Dallas, probably wanted nothing more to do with this mess. He could hire a lawyer, fight the challenge in court. But Blackwood was right. Legal fees would drain the trust fund and leave him with nothing. Or he could walk away. Surrender the land, return the money, Go back to being broke, but at least morally intact. The thought made him laugh bitterly. Morally intact. That ship had sailed 3 nights ago in a hotel room. The knock on his door came at midnight. Jackson grabbed his rifle before answering. It was Amelia. She stood on his porch in a traveling cloak, her face pale, her eyes wild. "What are you doing here?" Jackson hissed. "You said you were leaving." I did. But then Theodore sent me a telegram." She pushed past him into the house. "He's challenging the transfer. He's going to expose everything." "I know. He was here this morning, making threats." "Did you tell him anything?" "Of course not. But he's not stupid, Amelia. He knows something happened between us. He's going to dig until he finds proof." "There is no proof. We were careful." But her voice wavered. "Careful? The whole town saw me go to your hotel. Marcus Thornton already suspects something, and now Blackwood's sniffing around asking questions." Jackson ran his hands through his hair. This was a mistake. All of it. "So what do you want to do? Give up? Hand everything back and pretend it never happened?" "Maybe that's the smart play." "The smart play?" Amelia's voice rose. "You think Theodore will just let this go if we reverse the transfer? He's seen a weakness. He'll exploit it until there's nothing left." "Then what do you suggest?" "We stand our ground. We tell the board this was a legitimate business investment in frontier agriculture. I provide documentation showing due diligence, market research, projected returns." "You mean we lie?" "We create a narrative that's legally defensible." Amelia's eyes flashed. "Welcome to how business actually works, Jackson. The truth is whatever you can prove in court." "That's what your husband thought. Look how that turned out." The words hit like a slap. Amelia went very still. "That was low," she said quietly. "But it's true. You're doing exactly what he did, manipulating facts, creating false narratives, using money and lawyers to bend reality to your will." "To protect you, to protect what we built." "We didn't build anything. We made a dirty deal and now we're paying for it." Jackson's voice cracked. "I should never have agreed to this, should never have signed those papers, should never have—" He stopped. "Should never have what? Touched me? Kissed me? Spent a night pretending we were something other than 2 broken people making terrible choices?" Amelia's voice was raw. "Say it, Jackson. Finish the sentence." "Should never have believed it could work," he finished quietly. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire. "So that's it," Amelia finally said. "We just surrender? Let Theodore win?" "I don't know what else to do. I'm a rancher, not a lawyer. I don't know how to fight men like Blackwood. But I do." Amelia straightened her shoulders, and Jackson saw the steel core that had helped her survive marriage to Charles Forsyth. "I've been playing this game my whole adult life, and I'm done losing." "What are you planning?" "Something that will either save us both or destroy us completely." She pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is a notarized statement detailing every illegal transaction my husband ever made. Names, dates, amounts, methods, everything." Jackson stared at the envelope. "That's a death sentence for Forsyth Industries." "It's leverage. Theodore and the other board members are all complicit in Charles's schemes. If they push this challenge, I release the documents. The company collapses, they all go to prison, and their families lose everything." "You'd really do that? Destroy your own company?" "It was never my company. It was Charles's empire, built on stolen land and broken families." Amelia's voice was fierce. "I'd burn it all to the ground before I let them take back what I've given you." "Why? Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because it's the only good thing I've done in 3 years. Because you're the only person who's looked at me and seen a human being instead of a bank account. Because—" She stopped, her composure cracking. "Because I need this to mean something. I need one decision to be right, even if everything else was wrong." Jackson saw the desperation in her eyes and recognized it. They were the same, he realized. Both of them trying to redeem mistakes that might be beyond redemption. "If you do this, you'll have nothing left," he said softly. "The company will fold. Your fortune will evaporate. You'll be free." Amelia smiled, and it was the saddest thing Jackson had ever seen. "I'll be free. Isn't that worth something?" Before Jackson could answer, glass shattered in the back of the house. He spun, rifle already rising, as two men crashed through the window. "Get down!" Jackson shoved Amelia aside and fired. The shot went wide, but it bought him seconds to chamber another round. The intruders wore masks, but their intent was clear. One went for Amelia, while the other charged Jackson with a knife gleaming in the lamplight. Jackson dodged the first swipe, brought the rifle butt up hard into the man's gut. The attacker doubled over, and Jackson hit him again, this time across the jaw. The man dropped. But the second attacker had Amelia. She fought like a wildcat, clawing at his face, but he was bigger, stronger. His hand closed around her throat. Jackson didn't think. He reversed the rifle and fired point blank. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him away from Amelia. She collapsed, gasping for air. "Run!" Jackson shouted. "Get to the horses!" But before either of them could move, Ellie's scream cut through the chaos. Jackson's blood turned to ice. His daughter. He'd forgotten about his daughter. He ran to her room and found her backed into a corner, a third masked man advancing on her. The man turned when Jackson entered, and Jackson saw the gun in his hand. "Drop the rifle, or the girl dies." Jackson froze. Time stretched out, infinite and terrible. His daughter, his child, the only good thing in his entire broken life. He dropped the rifle. The man smiled behind his mask and raised his gun. Then Amelia was there, the envelope in one hand and a lit match in the other. "Tell Theodore if he wants these documents, he'd better call off his dogs right now. Otherwise, I drop this match and everything burns." The masked man hesitated. Through the broken window, Jackson heard horses approaching. More attackers? The sheriff? He couldn't tell. "You wouldn't," the man said. "That's your only leverage." "Try me." Amelia's hand was steady. "I've already lost everything that matters. What's a few pieces of paper?" The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then the man lowered his gun. "This isn't over." "Yes," Amelia said calmly. "It is." The attackers retreated through the broken window. Jackson heard them mount horses and gallop away. Only then did he run to Ellie and pull her into his arms. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm scared, Daddy," she was crying. "I'm so scared." "I know, baby, I know. But it's over now. You're safe." But even as he said it, Jackson knew it was a lie. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Amelia stayed the night, refusing to leave until the sheriff arrived at dawn. Jackson had sent word through a neighbor, but the lawman's face told him everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. "Can't do much without faces or names, Jackson," Sheriff Morton said, surveying the broken window. "And even if we had them, proving Theodore Blackwood ordered an attack is near impossible. Man's got lawyers stacked higher than hay bales." "So he just gets away with it?" Jackson's fists clenched. "He sends men to my home, threatens my daughter, and there's no consequences?" "I didn't say that," Morton glanced at Amelia, who sat at the kitchen table with Ellie, both of them nursing cups of tea. But going after a man like Blackwood requires evidence that'll stand up in court. And right now, all we got is your word against his. What if we had more than our word? Amelia set her teacup down carefully. What if we had documented proof of criminal activity spanning 20 years? Morton's eyes narrowed. What kind of proof? The kind that puts men in prison for the rest of their lives. She pulled the envelope from her cloak. Every illegal land seizure, every forged document, every bribe paid, every family destroyed. It's all here. The sheriff took the envelope with the reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. He opened it, scanned the first page, and his face went pale. Dear God, this is... He looked up at Amelia. Ma'am, if this is real, half the powerful men in Texas are going to hang. It's real. My husband kept meticulous records. He was proud of what he'd accomplished. Amelia's voice was flat. I've been trying to return what was stolen, but Theodore and the board won't let me. They'd rather protect their empire than do what's right. So now they get to choose. Back off and let me dismantle it piece by piece, or I release everything and they lose it all at once. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about justice. Amelia met his eyes. Theodore sent men to terrorize a child. What would you call that? Morton was quiet for a long moment. Then he folded the documents carefully and handed them back. I'll pay Mr. Blackwood a visit. Unofficial, of course. Just a friendly conversation about the risks of escalating conflicts. Will it work? Jackson asked. Depends on how much he values staying out of prison. Morton tipped his hat to Amelia. Ma'am, you're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the craziest. Haven't decided which yet. Can't it be both? Amelia's smile was tired. After the sheriff left, Jackson finally let himself look at Ellie. Really look at her. She was pale, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. She'd barely spoken since the attack, just sat quietly while the adults talked around her. Sweetheart, can you give me and Mrs. Forsythe a minute? Ellie nodded and retreated to her room without argument. That scared Jackson more than anything. His daughter had always been full of questions and energy. This quiet compliance was wrong. She's traumatized, Amelia said softly once they were alone. She needs to see a doctor, someone who understands. I know what she needs. What I don't know is how to give it to her when my home isn't safe anymore. Jackson slumped into a chair. This is my fault. I brought this down on us. We brought this down, both of us. Amelia moved to stand beside him. But we can also fix it, together. How? Even if Morton scares off Blackwood, the board can still challenge the transfer. They can still drag us through courts for years. And Ellie, his voice broke. She can't live like this, looking over her shoulder, wondering if bad men are coming back. Then we don't let them come back. Amelia pulled out a second envelope, this one thicker than the first. I spent yesterday in Dallas making arrangements. Wire transfers, property deeds, legal documents that will take effect the moment I send a telegram to my attorney. What kind of arrangements? The kind that dissolve Forsythe Industries completely. Every asset liquidated. Every shareholder paid out at market value. Every employee given 6 months severance and letters of recommendation. She set the envelope on the table. Theodore and the board get their money, but they lose their power. No more company to hide behind. No more empire to protect. Jackson stared at her. You'd really destroy everything your husband built? It should have been destroyed years ago. I was just too afraid to do it. Amelia's hands trembled slightly. But after last night, after seeing what they're willing to do, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm furious. And what happens to you after? When the company's gone and the money's distributed? I'll have enough to live comfortably. Not wealthy, but comfortable. I've already purchased a small house in San Antonio. Far enough from Dallas to start fresh. Close enough to visit if... She stopped. If what? If you'd allow it. If Ellie would want to see me sometimes. I know I have no right to ask, but... A crash from Ellie's room cut her off. Jackson was running before he could think, bursting through the door to find his daughter standing in the middle of shattered glass, her mother's photograph frame broken on the floor.
I'm sorry,
Ellie was sobbing.
I was holding it, and I dropped it, and I'm sorry.
Jackson swept her into his arms, boots crunching on glass. It's okay, sweetheart. It's just a frame. We can get another one.
But Mama's picture
is fine. See? Not a scratch. He carefully extracted the photograph from the broken frame. We'll put it in a new frame. Good as new.
Everything's broken,
Ellie cried into his shoulder.
Our window's broken, and Mama's frame is broken, and those men broke in, and everything's broken.
Jackson's heart shattered. He carried her back to the kitchen, holding her tight while she cried out 3 years of accumulated grief and fear and loss. Amelia watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her own face. When Ellie finally quieted, hiccuping against his chest, Jackson made a decision. Mrs. Forsythe and I need to tell you something, he said gently. And I need you to listen carefully, okay? Ellie nodded, still clinging to him. That land we got, the 600 acres, it used to belong to your great-grandfather, my grandfather. A bad man took it from him a long time ago, and Mrs. Forsythe's been trying to give it back to the families who lost their land.
Why didn't she just give it back? Why did those men come?
Because some people don't want her giving things back. They want to keep everything for themselves, even things that don't belong to them. Jackson glanced at Amelia. But Mrs. Forsythe is going to make sure they can't do that anymore. She's going to make sure we're safe.
How?
By being very brave and doing something very hard. Amelia knelt beside Jackson's chair, putting herself at eye level with Ellie. Those bad men work for people who used to work with my late husband, and I'm going to stop them from ever hurting anyone again. Are you going to tell the sheriff on them? Something like that. But it means I have to go away for a while. Maybe a long time. Ellie looked between them, her young face trying to process adult complexities.
Is it because of Daddy? Because you like him?
The question hung in the air like smoke. Jackson's throat closed up. I do like your daddy, Amelia said carefully. He's a good man. But mostly it's because what happened to your great-grandfather was wrong, and I'm trying to make it right. Do you understand?
I think so.
Ellie wiped her eyes.
Are you going to be okay?
The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, broke something in Amelia. She pressed her hand to her mouth, composing herself before answering. Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to be okay. And so are you and your daddy. I promise.
Okay.
Ellie laid her head back on Jackson's shoulder. I'm tired. I know you are. Jackson kissed the top of her head. Why don't you rest while I talk to Mrs. Forsythe? After Jackson settled Ellie in his bed, her room still covered in broken glass, he returned to find Amelia at the table, writing rapidly on a piece of paper. What's that? A telegram to my attorney, authorizing the dissolution. Her hand paused over the paper. Once I send this, there's no taking it back. Forsythe Industries ends. Theodore and the board lose everything except their payout. And your land is safe forever. I'm transferring it into a trust that no one can challenge. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. For Ellie. For you. For every family my husband destroyed. She finished writing and set the pen down. For me. Because I need to know I'm capable of one unselfish act. This isn't unselfish. You're destroying your own security. I'm destroying a prison made of money and guilt. Amelia stood. The house in San Antonio is paid for. I have enough savings to live modestly. And for the first time in 3 years, I'll be able to sleep at night without wondering whose lives were ruined to pay for my comfort. Jackson wanted to argue, but he saw the resolution in her eyes and knew it would be pointless. "When do you send it?" "Now, before I lose my nerve." She picked up the telegram. "There's a wire office in town. I can be there and back in 2 hours." "I'll go with you." "No, stay with Ellie. She needs you." Amelia pulled on her cloak. "Besides, this is something I need to do alone." At the door, she paused and turned back. "Jackson, thank you for everything. For being honest when everyone else in my life was lying. For making me feel human again. For—" her voice caught. "For that night. I know you regret it, but I don't. Not anymore." "I don't regret it either," Jackson heard himself say, and realized it was true. "I regret the circumstances, the manipulation, the way it happened. But not you. Never you." Amelia's smile was radiant and heartbreaking all at once. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Jackson stood in his broken house, listening to his daughter's quiet breathing from the bedroom, and wondered what came next. The answer arrived 4 hours later when Amelia returned, her face flushed with triumph and terror. "It's done. The telegram is sent. By this time tomorrow, Forsyth Industries will be officially dissolved." She handed Jackson a legal document. "And this is the new trust deed for your land. Irrevocable, protected from any claims by the former board members or shareholders. It's yours, Jackson, free and clear, forever." Jackson took the document with shaking hands. "What about Blackwood, the board? They'll get their payout, probably more money than they know what to do with. But they'll also get copies of those documents I showed Morton, with a note explaining that if they ever come near you or Ellie again, every page goes to the newspapers and the federal marshals." Amelia's eyes were hard. "They're greedy, but they're not stupid. They'll take their money and disappear." "And you? What happens to you now?" "I told you. San Antonio. A small house, a quiet life." She paused. "Maybe a teaching position at the girls' school there. I've always been good with numbers." "That's a hell of a step down from running an empire." "It's a step up from living in one built on bones." Amelia moved toward the door again. "I should go. My train leaves at sunset." "Wait." Jackson didn't know what he was going to say until the words were already out. "Don't go." Amelia froze. "What?" "Don't go to San Antonio. Don't disappear. Don't—" He struggled to find the right words. "Stay here, with us." "Jackson, that's impossible. The scandal alone would—" "Let them talk. Let the whole town gossip. I don't care anymore." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "You said you wanted something real. Something that costs something. This is real. Me asking you to stay. Me choosing you over my reputation, over what people will say, over everything except what's right in front of me. You don't know what you're asking. The whispers, the judgment, the way people will treat Ellie." "I know exactly what I'm asking, and I'm asking anyway." Jackson's voice was fierce. "Because last night, when those men broke in, the only thing I could think was that I was going to lose you before I ever really had you. And I can't, I won't let that happen." "What about Ellie? What will you tell her?" "The truth. That you're a good woman who made mistakes, but tried to fix them. That you saved our home and our future. That I—" He stopped. "That you what?" Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. "That I love you." The words felt like confession and absolution all at once. "God help me. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but it did. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise." Amelia's tears were flowing freely now. "I pushed my husband down the stairs.
I manipulated you into an impossible situation. I brought violence to your door. And you love me?
I love you because of all that, not despite it. Because you're trying to be better. Because you're fierce and broken and real. Jackson pulled her closer. Because when I look at you, I see someone fighting as hard as I am to make something good out of something terrible. And I don't want to fight alone anymore. I don't deserve this. Neither do I. But maybe that's the point. Maybe redemption isn't about deserving. Maybe it's about choosing to move forward anyway. Amelia kissed him then, and it was nothing like that desperate night in the hotel. This was softer, sweeter, filled with possibility instead of guilt. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears.
Daddy?
They turned to find Ellie standing in the bedroom doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes.
Hey, sweetheart. Did we wake you?
I heard talking. She looked at Amelia.
Are you staying?
Amelia glanced at Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. Would you like me to stay? Amelia asked gently. Ellie considered this with the seriousness of youth.
Mama's not coming back. I know that. And you're not Mama. But you're nice. And you make Daddy smile again.
She paused.
So yeah, I think you should stay.
Amelia knelt down to Ellie's level. If I stay, it won't be easy. People might say unkind things. Your friends might ask questions. Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Ellie's voice was steady.
We're family now, right? And family sticks together.
Amelia pulled the little girl into a hug, and Jackson watched the two of them, his daughter and this impossible woman who'd walked into his life with an offer that should have destroyed them both, but somehow saved them instead, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next weeks were chaos. Theodore Blackwood arrived with lawyers, threatening litigation until Sheriff Morton showed him the documents. The man went pale, took his settlement check, and left Texas entirely. The rest of the board followed suit, scattering to various states with their payout money and their tails between their legs. The townspeople whispered, of course, about Jackson Hale and the widow Forsyth, about how quickly she'd moved into his home, about what exactly had happened between them to produce such an arrangement. But Jackson discovered he didn't care. Let them talk. He had 600 acres of the best land in 3 counties, a daughter whose trust fund would see her through veterinary school twice over, and a woman who'd given up everything to give him a future. 6 months later, Jackson and Amelia married in a small ceremony with only Ellie and Sheriff Morton as witnesses. The preacher raised his eyebrows at the bride's circumstances, but held his tongue. Money still talked in Texas, even money that was being systematically given away. A year after that, they'd expanded the ranch operation to include the 600 acres fully. Amelia proved surprisingly adept at managing the books, her business acumen translating well to agricultural enterprise. Ellie flourished, growing stronger and more confident with each passing month. She called Amelia by her first name, never Mother. But the love between them was real and growing. On the 2nd anniversary of that impossible night in the hotel, Jackson and Amelia stood on the land that had brought them together, his grandfather's land, returned through the most complicated route imaginable. Do you ever regret it? Jackson asked, his arm around her waist. Which part? Pushing my husband down the stairs? Manipulating you into an impossible bargain? Destroying my family's company? Any of it. All of it. Amelia considered this, watching the sun set over the creek that never ran dry. I regret that it took so long, that I didn't have the courage to do it years ago. But the actual choices? No. They led me here, to you, to Ellie, to something real. Something real, Jackson echoed. Yeah, that's exactly what this is. They stood together as darkness fell, 2 people who'd done terrible things and made impossible choices, and somehow found redemption in each other's arms. The empire built on stolen land was gone, dismantled, piece by piece, and returned to those who'd lost everything. The guilt that had haunted them both had eased, replaced by the honest work of building something genuine. And on 600 acres of Texas grassland, where his grandfather had once stood and dreamed of a future that was stolen from him, Jackson Hale held the woman who'd given that future back, and knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most crooked paths led to the straightest truths. That love, born from guilt and desperation, could become love built on honesty and choice, and that the land his grandfather died protecting now belonged to a granddaughter who would never know poverty or powerlessness, because two broken people had chosen to be better than their worst moments.